Thank you, Rich. I appreciate you putting this together for us and the opportunity to present these new tools. Alan Pinto is a PhD student here in our department, in the Department of Agricultural Economics at Kansas State University. He's working with me on several projects, and one of them is building these interactive tools. And we've been getting a lot of conversations with Robin Reed, who's also online today. They both probably, hopefully, will chime in to provide some clarification from time to time. There's two tools we wanted to review. Like Rich said, one of them is on farmland values. It comes from USDA data. Also, the machinery tool is also based on USDA data. The weekly crop progress reports that come out about every Tuesday throughout the growing season is what we used. At the bottom of the screen, my email address is available, twgriffin@ksu.edu, and on social media platforms, I use the handle Space Plowboy. So I invite you to follow me on Twitter and so forth. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. I'm going to be using a web browser today. So all the tools that we're going to demonstrate are live and on AgManager. So if you want to follow along on your browsers, you can, or you can sit back and enjoy the show, so to speak. So basically all you need is a browser and a internet connection. Instead of downloading Excel files or spreadsheet files, all of these are live and on the web. I say they're live in that we are updating these. If you have any comments today, for instance, send them to Rich or Robin, myself, or Alan, and we can make improvements and put those online. So let's go to the familiar AgManager.info website. And if you're not familiar with this, I highly encourage you to browse around and take a look. All of our events are on here, and I'm sure that since you're online today that you more than likely have received emails from Rich via AgManager. The first one we want to talk about, well, both of them will be under farm management. The first one we want to talk about today is under land buying and valuing. You click on that, it'll take you to this page with all of these really useful tools. And the one we want to look at is using USDA NASS farmland values for farm management decision making. And this is our little dashboard. It's interactive. It has data from USDA. The data here is released the first week of August. I think Rich will speak a little bit more about that later today. So I believe the surveys happen maybe in January, and from USDA, and the data are released about the first week of August. And so the 2021 data was recently included in this tool. A few things I wanted to go over. At the bottom of this tool, there's some fact sheets that we had published. And in particular, there's this one that Tiffany Lashmet and I put together about 4 years ago about stepped up basis. It has some detail. It's about 50 pages long, but keep in mind that each of the lower 48 states has their own table. So it's really about a page and a half long with 48 pages of tables, one for each state. And this is a good tool here. But I wanted to emphasize that this tool is alive. We had a grad student a few years ago, Imra. He put this together and brought it to me, and I thought, wow, this is really cool. And then I've been maintaining it ever since. And Alan Pinto has joined our team to continue to update this. A few caveats here on the front page. When we're dealing with stepped up basis, this tool is not a substitute for having appraisal of the year of inheritance or comparative sales comps locally for that particular year. As sort of a third line of defense, this tool will be useful for those purposes. Going down the left-hand side, there's a plot farmland values. And this is a plot of the state chosen here. Kansas is the default in green, and the purple, bluish purple is the average of all US states. So the user, we may have people online today. I don't know where everybody's from. Maybe somebody from outside of Kansas, such as one of our neighbors, Nebraska. Nebraska data is here as well. But all the lower 48 states, Nebraska is like Kansas, a little bit lower than the national average. But if we look at one of the odd states in the Eastern Corn Belt, those values are greater than the national average. And Iowa, for instance, took a decrease over time the last few years. Let's go back to Kansas. If we're only interested in a part of this, if we're only interested maybe looking at since 1990, we can. And going down the tabs again, let's go down to, let's skip the calculators for right now. Let's look at the map. So the map allows you to look at the data going back to 1950. And I should have mentioned this particular data that we're looking at is ag land, including buildings. So it goes back to, many states go back to the late 1800s, but I've got it cut off at 1950. And you can choose whatever year you want to look at. Kind of give you a hint that the Northeast states have a pretty high farmland values. We think of Illinois and Indiana sometimes when we think about oil production, corn, wheat, soybean valued acres. The Northeast has different crops and of course different amount of urban sprawl. And looking at the 1990s all the way up to the current values, which, you know, if we can hover over Kansas and see it's $2,100, Oklahoma 2020, and Nebraska 3,100 was an average for all farmland, including buildings. So the calculator I wanted to demonstrate today is this one that says calculate estimated stepped up basis. Before I go there, let's, one more thing, download data. We created this tab so that if you wanted to download the data yourself and put it into a spreadsheet or other business intelligence software, you're more than welcome to download the data to do your own analyses. Calculate estimated stepped up basis. Let's click on that. I've added a description and disclaimer, kind of repeat some of the issues that we see to prevent some of the misuse of the tools. And if you're really interested in the arithmetic and how we went about the calculations, it's under this example. But we enter our data on the left side, and then the results will be on the right. The base, I put it to 1982. I want to emphasize that this is really for academic purposes. The typical user would not need to do anything with this, but the typical user would select their state. The lower 48 states again are here. Kansas, let's go back to Kansas. We can plug in an inheritance year. So for instance, we may have inherited farmland in 1975. And if we top it, I want to, you know, did that intentionally. We can hit the little arrows up and down to make sure we get the right year. And the same thing here with the current year of appraisal. And this is typically going to be the current year because let's say we just sold the farm or we got an appraisal on it. And if we don't have an appraisal for the inheritance year, we don't have good comps in the local area, we may want to use this tool. So let's say we inherited the farmland in 1975. We have a current appraisal in 2021, and it appraised for $3,250. And again, these are index values used in the calculation. The typical user will not need to worry about this, but the typical user will be concerned about this part under the results. It was estimated the farmland value at inheritance was about $460. Precisely, it was estimated to be $458. But keep in mind, this is a estimate, it is not a exact figure. The difference between the current farmland value of $3,250 and $458 is $2,792. This is the value, this is the amount that the tax professionals will be interested in when it comes to estimating the potential tax liability. That being said, I encourage those who are using this, landowners, farmers, tax professionals, to consult your tax professional. Could be a tax attorney, accountants. There's tax professionals who need to be consulted when it comes to putting this information to use. So that was a kind of a quick overview. I'm going to slow down for just a minute and see if there were any questions. Rich, Robin, do you see any questions on your end?
We don't have anything yet, Terry.
Okay.
I'll holler if we do.
Robin, Alan, do you have any comments you want to add for clarification?
Terry, were you going to have Alan talk about what we're trying to do to enhance this?
I think that's an excellent idea, Robin. Alan, how are you trying to enhance this?
Okay, so I'm trying to update and create two different tabs. The first one, on the plot farmland value, I'm trying to create a new graph where we are going to compare the 4 different type of data that we have on land. We have pasture land, irrigated, non-irrigated, and then ag land. And I'm also trying to create 3 different graphs where we are going to compare the value for that state and the US average. And on the other tab, I'm trying to create an index or a calculator where the farmers can say, for example, I have a specific land and it's not 100% irrigated or non irrigated. So it's a mix of the 3 of them, and the price is gonna be different. So on that calculator, the farms can say, okay, my land is this percentage pasture, this irrigated, and this non irrigated. What will be the price? So that the calculator is gonna take the percentage of the land and multiply it by the price of the land in the specific year and state.
So one of the things about the data that Alan is talking about for irrigated farmland, non-irrigated, and pasture land is that we don't have data going back to the 1950s. How far back does that particular data go?
From 1997 until 2021.
So the mid 1990s to the present. So that's one of the reasons we didn't include it initially. It just didn't go back that far, but we are going to add that to this particular tool. And we have a working version, but we just have not released it yet. We want to make sure that it is 100% accurate first. I should have mentioned earlier, if any of you want to, throw into the chat box an example that you want us to run, we can. Like I said, it has data for the lower 48 states, and it doesn't have to be, Kansas. You could, my home state of Arkansas is in here. Looks a lot like Kansas. It's below the national average. And if we go down to a stepped up basis, we'd still need to choose the state on the page that we're working on. So, if you choose to pay the state for one page, it doesn't necessarily carry over to the others. But this is one of our new tools. It was released. The date here was about 11 months ago, almost 12 months ago. We've made some updates to it since then, and we will continue to do so. Like Alan and Robin were describing, we'll add those bells and whistles if any of you have a suggestion that you would like for us to add, please send it to us. We'll gladly consider it. And, this tool is fully operational. I'd say it's at 100%, but that doesn't mean that the second version that we upload won't have more bells and whistles. So it's alive in that respect, and that it's interactive, but also we'll continue to develop this, hopefully with your suggestions. Rich just uploaded the tool, the URL that goes directly to this, if you'd like to see that. And you can follow along on your browser. I'm going to speak about another tool next, but I wanted to pause and see if there was any comments or questions before we do so. We got a question from Shauna. Is there any way to determine what factors are contributing how much value to land values? So for hunting, recreational use, changes in crop value, et cetera. There's lots of research on that. This particular tool does not address any of it. So one of the caveats that I wanted to add to the disclaimer that we haven't added yet is when Alan was talking about irrigated and non-irrigated farmland, for instance, using this tool, if you'd inherited farmland in 1975 and since then added irrigation system to it, well, that change would kind of negate the ability to use the tool as it is, because adding the irrigation system, those types of improvements would drastically affect farmland value. So the percentage changes would be different. But no, this tool does not address the contributing factors of hunting, crops, recreational use, and that kind of thing. Robin spends a lot of time on land valuation. She's in charge of the, I believe this, the American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers have a booklet for Kansas. Robin, do you have any details about the question on the chat?
Yeah, and Rich can drop that link in too. But basically what we do to try to give a county level value to land values each year, we get the sales that occurred in Kansas through the property valuation department in Topeka, and I try to repackage those into an easy format to look at. And I try to drill down at the county level to irrigated, non-irrigated, and pasture or hay ground sales. And this is difficult to do because most of the time our parcels that sell are not purely one of those three categories, but a mixture of them. So we do an economic procedure to try to break out those values into a pure value for what is the irrigated, dryland, and pasture part. But I will say, so we published the 2020 book back in April, I believe, and already looking at land values at the beginning of 2021, we were up 10% from a year ago. And I think a lot of you across the state can see that in the excitement in the land value and how things are ramping up. USDA, when Terry updated this last week or the week before, they have Kansas up about 13% in land values over 2020. So we are seeing a lot of movement in the land market right now.
Cliff asked a really good question about, Kansas not only is a big state, but we have a lot of climatic differences between East and West. And land values must be very different from, let's say, Northeast Kansas. It kind of looks like Iowa versus Southwest Kansas. It looks, a lot more arid, receiving maybe half the rainfall. Would those differences allow this tool to continue to be useful? I'm going to argue yes. But I think what Robin was just talking about, having county level PVD data will be important as well. So one of the things when we looked at the cropland, irrigated cropland, non-irrigated cropland, pasture land for any individual states, those percent changes within the state tended to be fairly close compared to percent changes for a different state. Robin, can you see Cliff's comment? I think that kind of reiterates what you were just saying about the PBD data.
Yeah, like Terry said in the beginning, the best way to estimate this, especially if it's in more recent years, is with an appraisal or looking at comparable sales. We've been only publishing the land values book for, I think, 3 years now, so we're not going to be a whole lot of help there. But I think where this is most useful is the questions that we get when the land was inherited, back in the homesteading days, or, laid really far back years that there's just nothing comparable to compare to for the value of that land. And I think, you do have a point there, Cliff. We do have values in Northeast that have been escalating, probably more so than some of our western counties, but with the irrigation and things, there is some messiness there. But I think this tool, again, is most useful when you're really looking far back in time and need to find a beginning value for that stepped up basis calculation.
So we're going to kind of switch gears now and look at a machinery fieldwork tool. And it's going to have some of the same issues that Cliff brings up. But thankfully, we do have data for, let's say, Southwest Kansas, Northeast Kansas, for the 9 crop reporting districts. So if you envision Kansas and kind of divvy up each of the corners of the state, they have their data available. All right, so I'm going to back to the AgManager.info homepage for the website. And this particular tool is, again, under farm management and machinery. And then go down to the bottom. It stays suitable for field work for all states. The first tool I'm going to demonstrate is for state level, which, again, isn't perfect. But for Kansas and a handful of other states, we have data by crop reporting district, which means in Kansas, each district has about 9 counties. And I'm going to demonstrate the tool for the entire state first and give you a sneak peek for what's coming for the more detailed data. So this data comes from USDA. Every week, about on Tuesday, is when I expect these reports to be released, a crop progress and condition report. You may be familiar with seeing what % of Kansas grain sorghum is planted, or what % of corn is emerged, harvested, as well as a proportion of the crop that is excellent or poor, or so forth. There's a piece in here that's called days suitable for field work, and it's defined as, out of the 7 days that week, how many days could we get into the field and operate farm machinery? So this first graph is trend lines versus the current year. So the way we look at this is on the y-axis, 0 to 7, with 7 being the most. And the x-axis is time, going from about March to early December. And the red line, and this is interpreted as the 20th percentile, meaning 20 years out of 100, we would have fewer days to get into the field than that. The gray line in the middle, that's the median, that's 50th percentile. So half the years would have fewer days than that, and half the years have more. And the green line at the top is the 80th percentile, meaning 8 out of 10 years would have fewer days to get into the field, and 2 out of 10 years would have more days to get into the field than that. The purple, that's the observed for the current year. That's 2021. The trend lines were an average or estimate from 1978 to 2020 for the entire state. And the purple line is, just this year. So you're probably saying, okay, Griffin, that's great, but so what? Well, if we take that same data and then we look at a date range, so the default here is from March 31st to May 22nd, but let's choose something maybe middle of April to end of May. And the way this works, these are weeks ending. I'm going to emphasize that when we choose April 11 we choose a Sunday where this model works. We go from April 11th. That includes the entire week before April 11th. And so when we see this date range, since we're choosing 1 week at a time, it's the week ending April 11th to the week ending May 30. So during that time period, this is the histogram for the number of days. So we would interpret this as that we had 2 years that had 16, 17, or 18 days. We had 1 year that had about 20 to 22 days. And if we look at the other end, we had 2 years that had 42 to 44, 4 years during that 30-year time period that had 40 to 42 days. The green line is the 15th percentile. The blue line is the median, the 50th percentile. And this green zone is about 15th to the 45th to the 50th percentile. This, without any other information, I would argue is what we need to plan for when we're looking at a 5-year planning horizon when we're equipping the farm. The same information can be here, but each of these dots is the observation for that particular year, with x-axis being years and the y-axis being the total number of days. The paragraph here gives us a little bit of information. It says a low of 16 was observed in 1993. So that's this one, 1993 had 16 days. A high was 43 back in 89, which would have been right here. The green line is the same as the 15th percentile as we discussed in the histogram. The blue line is the average. So here for the state, during this time period, the average had 32.5 days, and the 15th percentile was 23. So, and the orange line is the slope, asking, are we getting more or less days over time? So on average, each year we're getting about 0.3 more days, or if you look at it over a decade for 10 years, we're getting about 2.9 more days per during this time period to get into the field. So that's this tool. Based upon last week, I got a little pushback from one of our farmers who actually have his current job. He would get retired, and thankfully, so I could move in to Kansas State. We had the same information, but we looked at it from crop reporting districts. So let's say Northeast Kansas, and we'll choose the dates. Let's say we'll choose the same dates we had before. Weekend in April 11th to May 30 for Northeast Kansas. And if we want to look at Southwest Kansas, it's going to look a little bit different, a lot more dry. So this one's operational. I'm going to put it on Ag Manager. It was, this weekend I worked on it and I actually put it online yesterday. We'll get it on Ag Manager soon. I'm going to take a look at some of the chat messages that are popping up.
Terry, I think we've taken care of most of that with some links there.
Thank you. I should have known you'd taken care of that, so I wouldn't have to worry about it. But so that's a kind of a quick demonstration of this particular tool. And so why do we need this? Well, when we're looking at, now I do this in class with our students. I challenge them to think about how many days do you have during typical wheat harvest. So let's say June 15th to July 15th. How many days a week do you actually plan to be harvesting? And the answer is not 7, something less than 7. And so we look at the historical data to answer that particular question. So I'll plug those particular dates in. So I'm going to choose June 20 through July 18, and individual users may want to fine tune that. I think that's about the most active dates according to USDA. But any individual farmer may add or take away a few weeks just to be more accurate for their particular farm. So that's kind of a demonstration of that particular tool. It is available by crop reporting district. Well, it's operational if you want to plug in the URL, which is shiny.agmanager.info/Kansas DSFW, to play around with it until we get it on the AgManager.info proper website itself. So that's kind of a quick overview of this particular tool. Any thoughts, questions, criticisms, suggestions for improvements are always welcome, and we'll get that added. Give you an idea of what we're planning for this one. I'm going to allow the user to select the crop and the field activity. So they can select grain, sorghum, wheat, corn, soybean, and it'll pull in the USDA data about the most active times for planting, harvest. And the user can say, okay, give me corn planting dates, and it'll automatically populate the dates, so we won't have to plug it in. But the user can override those dates too, because a lot of times we'd recognize that the entire state may be using a certain most active dates, but for my particular farm, I know I don't start there early, or I may start a week earlier, so they can override those dates based upon their own observations.
Folks, go ahead if you have any comments or questions on this. We don't have a big group, so let me just make it available so you could unmute if you wanted to. Hang on, let me. You can unmute here if you're wanting to, and just talk to Terry if that's something you want to do.
On a tangential topic, I appreciate all the folks who report to USDA, National Ag Statistics Service, whether if it's university county agents, farm operators, landowners, other USDA staff who report these on these surveys, for the farmland values, for the crop progress, and all the above. I think Rich is going to talk more about what reports are coming out and when here pretty soon. But I just wanted to, many of you have reported to these surveys, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's something where you just keep preaching, and I realize folks get a lot of stuff. My dad handed that over to me, and he had been throwing them away, but then started letting me do it, and it really is valuable information there. Go ahead, if you've got anything, you can either unmute or you can type something in the chat if there is anything you'd like to know or suggest.
This time series graph, I didn't mention it directly, but this orange line is the trend line. Some states and some locations during certain time periods are increasing number of days suitable over time. Some are decreasing, and some are not really significant. There might be a little bit of slope to it, but it's statistically we wouldn't say that there is a. We feel good about saying that there is a statistical difference. So that's one of the things I'm looking at, and I'm playing around with this map. I'm not happy with the map yet. It's not giving me the information I'm really looking for, but I'm trying to plot how each region is having more or fewer days suitable over time during a specific time period. Anyway, it's kind of a little side project. My question is, how does ag technology impact this? Flotation tires or tracks, maybe no-till production allows equipment to enter the field to plant sooner, or that kind of thing, or have more days per week. Yeah, I think this may be a tool that I would use with a lender to show how many days we should expect and how much equipment is needed to make sure that we are able to get in the field to get all that completed. And there's the green zone. Reason that it's a zone and not just a line is that it depends on a bunch of factors. Let's say the price of your commodity, the yield penalty from not being able to get into the field and plant on time or harvest on time. And also it has something to do with the equipment costs, whether you rent the equipment or buy a bigger planter, the equipment cost goes into that economic decision as well. But it's not only dollars and cents, it's also part of the utility maximization of the rural household. So a lot of farms tell me that if they're not able to get into the field and plant on time, they stay up at night worrying. Or the opposite of that is, well, if I have too much equipment and the payments or maybe even the repair and maintenance bills are too high, I cannot sleep at night. So now there's a balance in there somewhere in the green zone. Days suitable and yields. I've looked at those. The question is, have you looked at possible correlations between days suitable and field work? I have. And it's kind of a weird little correlation in that during planting, if you get 7 days a week, hey, that's great. You can get in the field and put a lot of acres behind the planter, but there's other problems, right? It hasn't rained in a while. It's really dry, and that contributes to yield. Long story short, I've not found a direct correlation that says when days suitable are high or low during planting time equates to yield differences. Although I'm sure that there is a causality in there somewhere, but we just didn't find it in our quick little analysis. Okay, give an example of a planter capacity buying decision using a model for a farm with 1,000 acres of cropland running a 50-50 corn split. Okay, so the way I would do that, I would use, let me go to I got a slide set for that I use in class. And it's not necessarily on planter, but it's a so this is a whole farm planning lecture I do in farm management on campus here at K-State. I want to fast forward to something that kind of parallels what this is a senior level undergraduate course. If you went to K-State, this part of 598 was a course number. At the end. So one of the first things we need to do is determine the working rate of that planter. Okay, so whether it's a 12 row, 24 row, it has a width. It also has a speed, and speeds of change recently with new planters, high speed planters. The ground speed is different. So this is the equation we're dealing with to get to what I call the working rate. Ground speed times the width and field efficiency, and divided by a constant. Field efficiency is the amount of time that the machine is planting, divided by the amount of time that the machine is devoted to the job. So refilling of seed, refueling the tractor, turning around on the ends, all count against field efficiency. Usually 70% on the planter is what we use historically. When I say historically, those numbers came from the 1970s and they're still in use. Although with high-speed planting, assuming the same amount of turnaround time, field efficiency would actually decrease, but that's a kind of a good thing because your speed is increased. So that's where we get the working rate from. So that'd be one part of that equation. So acres per hour. And then we would use that and multiply by the number of hours that we would have from that model that we're just looking at. And a model would give us the days and multiply that by the number of hours per day. It depends on, many people would plant during daylight hours, so they may have 12 or 14 hours per day they would plant. Some may want to plant closer to 20 hours per day, if they have guidance systems and adequate lighting. So that would be kind of a quick example of how I would go about that.
It was Sandra and Alan Hill there, if you were looking for a name.
Yep, I see that now. Kind of lost it for a moment. And one of the questions, part of that was a corn bean split. And I think that's a really important thing to consider. I put this together last year. This green is the typical corn planting time for I think the entire state of Kansas. And the red is soybean planting time. Okay, so when corn is about half planted is about the time soybean begin to be planted in the state. And let's say when corn is about 80 percentile planted, soybeans are about 25% planted. So, the thing I try to get across to my students in that class is the same machine is being competed for two different crops that like to be planted at different times of the year. And so that's something to really consider. So it's yield penalties from both crops need to be taken into consideration when we're using one machine in that location.
So Terry, would someone want to use, instead of maybe an average field days available, maybe use the upper, like you have a 75% or something as they consider, coming up with how much they need?
I would use, so the number I shared earlier was the 15th to the 45th percentile. And this is from a document that I worked on when I was at Purdue. Actually, it was existing numbers, maybe quite old, but it was, the range was 15th through the 35th percentile for springtime and about 35th percentile to the 45th percentile for the harvest season. And so the idea there is this green zone is 15th to the 45th. And so it kind of depends on your risk preference as a producer. But the left part of this green zone would be about what people would want to plan for. So this particular bar is 22, 23, 24 days within this time period from June 20 to weekend in June 20 to weekend in June 18th. So I would go that direction. If we plan for more than the median, if we plan for 7 days a week, having equipment, we're likely to be having more equipment than we need. And if we're doing custom operations, that needs to be taken into consideration as well in our acreage. But if we are planning for the number of days, I'd say the left part of this green bar is what I would do as a risk averse producer.
Yeah, thanks. I just thought I'd clarify that. Anything else, folks?
I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for the interaction and feedback. It's good to have the opportunity to present some of our Ag Manager interactive dashboards. Hope you find them useful.